psychologist, and her research has focused on a number of topics under the general umbrella of existential positive psychology. I don't know if she agrees with that, but I made that up. She has expertise on topics such as the psychology of well-being, especially meaning and purpose in life, the psychology of motivation, narrative approaches, folk, lay theories of the good life, and individual differences in intuitive information processing. She's published over 90 articles and chapters, as well as 2 textbooks. Last year in 2011, Dr. King received the prestigious Carol and Ed Diener Award for Distinguished Contributions in Personality Psychology. Her merit as a leading international scholar has been recognized by several federal funding agencies. This recognition has come in the form of considerable funding from the NIMH and the NSF, National Institute of Mental Health and National Science Foundation. One such grant was entitled Goals, Identity, and Meaning in Life. Another funded grant was entitled Expressive Writing Following Traumatic Brain Injury, Effects on Psychological Health and Community Civic Involvement. Currently, Dr. King has an NSF grant under review for the amount of $200,000 to study the functions of meaning. She has served as editor or associate editor of a number of top-tier journals in personality and social psychology, and is currently the editor of the elite journal known as the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, JPSP, where she is the editor-in-chief of the section on personality processes and individual differences. For you Canadians, and I'm one of them, that's personality processes. As an instructor at the Department of Psychology at the University of Missouri, she is an acclaimed teacher. In the year 2000, Dr. King was honored with a Hope Professor Award, HOPE Professor Award for Excellence in Teaching. Now, while the award was given at Southern Methodist University, I am sure her students at Missouri equally value her skill as an instructor. Not to belabor the point, tonight we are in for a surprise and a treat from Dr. King. Tonight we are lucky to have Dr. King in our midst, and her curious lecture title is entitled Noticing Meaning in Everyday Life, Pleasure, Intuition, and Magic. Please help me welcome Dr. Laura King.
One thing you probably don't know about me is that I am not a night owl at all. I'm a morning person. And I'm not usually awake at this hour. I mean, that is actually true, so this should be fun. I'm not sure that it's even happening. I kind of wonder if perhaps this is a dream and I'm still on the plane to Toronto and I fell asleep. In any case, here we go. Before I begin, I wanted to congratulate all the award winners, and I wanted also to thank Paul for inviting me this year. I have long been interested in the concept of meaning and the issues. I wanted to see what time it is. Okay, so if it gets to be about midnight, someone remind me that it's time to stop talking. And it's just an honor to be here. To have my scholarship included among the many amazing people that you've heard from so far this weekend. I'm tired. Okay, so one of the things, of all the things that I don't care for about positive psychology is the tendency to keep moving the field goals of well-being and the good life. Like, it was fine a few years ago to be happy, but now that's not enough. You have to be flourishing. My parents were really happy people with enormously satisfying relationship, and they were wonderful parents, but they never heard of eudaimonia, and I don't think they ever thought they were having it. They might be concerned if it was served at a restaurant or something, right? But we take the good things in life and we put them up on a shelf very, very high. And we catalog them with names that regular people don't understand. And they don't, in my opinion, need to understand. And I think of all the goods in life, meaning in life has probably been the victim of this to the greatest extent. We have this odd situation where meaning is something that we acknowledge as adaptive and important, while at the same time claiming that nobody could actually ever have it. Nothing that human beings require to survive should be so widely inaccessible, or we would all be dead. If we need to experience meaning, if that's something human beings need to survive, then it ought to be something we can have access to, like food and water and air. So the perspective that I bring on meaning is maybe therefore sort of different than this notion that meaning is something that is accomplished by the rare few. Because I do take very seriously the notion that meaning has a role to play in human adaptation. But I think that that role has to do with something that happens to us every day. Now, I am sure that at some point as I'm speaking, I will offend someone in here who thinks of meaning in the other way, that it should be on a pedestal. And I will therefore, in anticipation of that offense, quickly pull out my favorite William James quote, which I rarely said after 8 o'clock at night. Let's see if I can do it. William James said the following: "All goods are disguised in the vulgarity of their concomitants in this workaday world. But woe to him who can only recognize them when he thinks them in their pure and abstract form." Even though we might think of meaning as this good with a capital G, just like William James did, like all goods, it has to be part of our everyday life, our quotidian existence. And the trivial things that I'll be talking about today, in my opinion, are about really embedding meaning in people's everyday lives. Okay, let's see. Really? I don't know how to do this. So let's start out by talking about verbs. Action words. When we talk about meaning, the verbs that we often associate with meaning are these: searching, making, constructing. We very rarely think of things like noticing or recognizing. And I'm going to go so far as to suggest another one. What if meaning is happening? Right? Mm-hmm. Now, there are lots of verbs. I think of all the verbs associated with meaning, Viktor Frankl is most likely associated with searching, right? Based on the title of his classic book. But this is a quote from Viktor Frankl: "The meaning of our existence is not invented by ourselves, but rather detected." That's what I'll be talking about today, tonight, this evening, and probably into some of tomorrow morning. Meaning detection. To kind of get started, this is not, okay. We have to step outside of our comfort zone sometimes. So to start out, to give you a feeling for what I'm talking about, to get your heads around this approach to meaning, about noticing meaning, I wanted to share a story. So, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, so many million years ago, when I was a young woman, Great. When I first started my career, I was a professor at Southern Methodist University, and I decided to volunteer as a literacy tutor. I don't know why. It seemed to me wrong that here we are, right, we're at this university, right, an institution where everybody spends all their time writing and reading, and that there would be people on campus who couldn't read or write. And so I volunteered to be a literacy tutor, and I was trained, and then went, and I had my first student, not the greatest of successes, although I did write a really nice letter for him to his parole board. My second student was a young man named Douglas, and Douglas was 22 years old. He was an African-American young man. He had a high school diploma
2 kids, and he could not read. And he worked in the food service at our university, and he was like the sandwich guy. And what he wanted to do was to learn to read so that he could move up and become the fry cook guy. So I met Douglas, and we started working together, and we met for an hour, twice a week, for 2 years, so that I could try to teach him to read. And Douglas, obviously, if someone has gone through the entire education process and can't read, something, they needed some individual attention a long time ago. And he was not a reader. We worked together, and it was a really, it was a horrible struggle. I'm not a clinical psychologist. Everybody else thinks I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I do not help people. This story, notwithstanding, I'm not up for that sort of thing. But I met with Douglas, and we just kept going through these things that we're supposed to do. And together we read, the first book he'd ever read in his life, Rites of Passage, and he was shocked when he saw the picture on the back of the author and saw that it was an African American. He literally had no idea that there were African American authors. I helped him register to vote. It was the first time he'd ever voted. I helped him get the library card. But it was a terrible, I felt that it wasn't going well at all. And each week I would say things to him like, Douglas, why don't you just quit? I'm going to do it. I'm here for you. But this isn't working, right? You're not learning to read. I'm not a coach. What are we doing here? And he would get pulled over by the police all the time for driving while black in the neighborhood where SMU was located. And he would say things to me like, well, Laura, I'm sorry I was late, but I got pulled over, but this time they just let me go. And so I got lucky. And I was like, no, that's not luck. That guy had no business pulling you over. You should have told that cop, blah, blah, blah. And he'd say, Laura, you've never actually had this experience. Every single person in his family was in jail, including his mother. And I would say, Douglas, why don't you just give up? This is ridiculous. You have to deal with so much more trouble than any human being could ever be expected to do, and now you want to learn to read? And he said, Laura, I want to learn to read because I want a better job, and I want a better life with my kids. And you have agreed to help me learn. How dumb would I be if I didn't at least take advantage of this opportunity? And I was like, Douglas, wow. Maybe I look at 10 or something, and I'm like, you're so inspiring. And he was the most motivated student I've ever had in my entire life. He showed up, we worked hard, 2 years, and towards the end of that 2 years, we were reading together a biography of Martin Luther King Jr. And we had this thing that we would do. I would read a paragraph, and then I would scooch the book over to him, and he would struggle through a paragraph. And sometimes I would just be like, I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs to get to the short one for him, because it's taking forever. It was such a nightmare. And it was such a struggle. And so we were reading together, and I read my paragraph, and I slid it over to him, and he started reading his paragraph. And he was reading. He was reading the way you or I would read. He might hit a word that he didn't know, but he would just kind of figure out what it was and keep on going. And I started freaking out. I started thinking, he's been faking this whole time. You can't just show up and start reading. And I said, Douglas, oh my God, what's going on? You're reading. You're really reading. And he said, I know, Laura, I don't know what happened. He said, after the last time we met, I was walking around, and I started seeing words. And he said, yeah, Laura, it hit me. It's like you don't turn reading on and turn reading off. You just see a word and you just read it. The person doesn't turn reading on and turn reading off. They're just always reading. And I said, Douglas, that's right. And I felt like, Annie Sullivan signing water. Water with Helen Keller. I'm like, water. The hair was standing up on my arms. And he said, you know something, Laura? Do you know they put the names of the streets on signs moment corner, so you always know where you are. And I said, Douglas, that's right. And then he said, do you know something, Laura? There are some everywhere. I did it. I gave the gift of reading. Now, Douglas was talking about reading and how we don't turn reading on and turn reading off. We're just always reading. And I'm going to suggest that that's a really interesting way to think about meaning. That we don't turn meaning on and turn meaning off. Meaning is coming all the time. Meaning is part of this process of being in the world in ways that maybe we haven't really thought, we haven't really accepted, because we've always talked about meaning when it's broken, when it's not working. Nobody's actually defined meaning, as far as I can tell, in the various talks and settings that I've been in. I want to just propose this, or remind you that one very common way psychologists define meaning is as connections, or patterns, or associations, or relationships, and typically these are things that human beings construct and impose on their world. The patterns, relationships, and connections that the human meaning maker creates. And psychologists often talk about human beings as natural meaning makers, and I realize I should have gone back farther. I say just about everybody starting in 1599. I dated that back to Hamlet, where you write there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. And many, many people, including me and lots of people here, have talked about the fact that human beings, something happens and we create meaning out of it. But let's have a moment to remember that if meaning is connections, patterns, associations, and relationships, wait a minute. Those exist in reality, independent of human meaning making or the human meaning maker. The world is characterized by patterns, connections, reliable relationships, or invariances. And these things are automatically detected through basic processes of perception and learning. James Gibson, in his ecological approach to perception, noted that if the specifying invariances are normally available, an active observer can extract them and does not have to construct them. Then if there is invariance, if there are reliable associations in the world, then we can actually just pull them out. We don't have to make them up. And research in neuroscience, right, very recent research, has demonstrated that this is the case. For example, covariation in stimuli is detected automatically by our visual system, and certainly occurs far downstream of any kind of construction process. Learning, right? You all remember from intro psych when you learned about associative learning, right? Classical conditioning and operant conditioning are about detecting regular associations between stimuli, in which a meaningless stimulus, called a conditioned stimulus, takes on meaning because it's been associated with an unconditioned stimulus. What I want you to consider is what the rat on your left, what does the rat on the left tell us about the life of the rat on the right? Right, in a laboratory, rats can learn associations really pretty well and pretty rapidly. In the real world, the fact that those rats in the cage can learn those associations tells us something about the real world that the other rat lives in. And this is a quote from Mike Donion's work on the functional perspective on classical conditioning. And he says, for the pairings of CS and USs to be functional in a natural environment, CS-US pairings must be a feature of that environment. Those pairings must exist in the world in order for this to be an adaptive capacity. There's capacity to detect invariances. So we can learn two lessons from a rat. I know that Mickey is a mouse, but what the heck. Two lessons from a rat about objective reality and meaning. And Mickey tells us, first, hey kids, the world makes sense.
Even though as human beings we talk all the time about making sense of things, we don't make all the sense that there is. Some of the sense is out there. Further, conscious reflection is not required to detect or extract that sense. That's what Mindy says. Oh, okay. So animal learning and perception both show that there's this sort of non-conscious capacity to extract invariances or reliable patterns or lawfulness in the world. There's also evidence from developmental psychology and cognitive development to suggest that babies can tell when the world is making sense. So this is pictures from a study by one of my colleagues at the University of Missouri, Yu-Yan Luo, and her colleague, Renee Bailar-Zhang. And what they did is they showed babies, 2.5 to 4.5-month-old babies, these scenes. Well, okay, sorry. These are possible scenes, and these are impossible scenes. In the possible scene, the baby is watching a puppet show, and the puppet comes out, goes behind this occluding panel, and comes out the other end, right? And that makes sense. The baby, the puppet can't be seen while she's making her journey across. In the impossible events, the researchers are messing with these babies, so they actually have 2 puppets, right? And so the puppet enters the stage, goes behind his first panel, and then a little bit of time goes by, but she never appears, and then she pops out on the other side. In the impossible situation, these babies, right, who of course Piaget said, out of sight, out of mind, I think we are seeing that we live in an increasingly post-Piagetian world. Those babies noticed. Even babies looked longer and showed expressions indicative of stupefaction when that puppet did not appear between those 2 walls. What? The babies noticed that ain't right. Something weird's going on. And in fact, they found that in some of the 4.5-month-olds, the reason they didn't get the effect is because they had figured it out. They were looking for another puppet. They're like, oh, you've got 2 puppets there. It's not even funny. I got that figured out, right? Even 2.5-month-old infants looked longer at the impossible situations than at the possible situations, suggesting a very primitive understanding of the laws of physics, right? But no. Well, then one might say that just before they saw this violation, the world was making sense, even for infants as young as 2.5 months of age. Now this would tell us that babies notice when the laws of physics are violated, right? When things don't make sense. I would suggest that it takes a much more sophisticated cognitive architecture to notice when things make sense. To take a moment and recognize the default, right? These babies noticed when experience went against what everybody knows, right? It went against the default. But those moments that we just take for granted are ones that take a lot of, I think, insight to notice a certain type of brilliance. So consider Isaac Newton. This is a quote from Isaac Newton. This is actually from a memoir of Isaac Newton written in 1852 by Stukely. And this is Newton's description to Stukely of his discovery of the law of gravity. He said, "Why should that apple always descend perpendicularly to the ground? Why should it not go sideways or upward? Why is this thing that every single human being who's ever existed has seen? Objects fall down." But it took until 1852 for somebody to point it out. An amazingly brilliant person to say, hey, wait a minute. I noticed something about the default state. This is how things always are. Why would that be the case? I think that this Newton's discovery of gravity has some lessons for the science of meaning. First of all, what is the question of meaning? It's the why. People always, all right, what separates a meaning maker from a non-meaning maker is the question why. Why did this happen? And Newton's experience tells us is that sometimes the answer to the question why lies in the natural world. Also notice that Newton did not construct gravity. Things had been falling down way before that, right? He noticed it. He took a second and noticed something everyone had always seen, as if the scales fell from his eyes and all of a sudden he saw something that we all saw but hadn't noticed. And finally, note that the foundation of our understanding of gravity came as a result of somebody noticing gravity doing what gravity does. And I would suggest that we might learn more about meaning if we didn't always study it when it was missing, absent, broken, or violated. When meaning isn't shattered, what does it feel like? What is the search for meaning searching for? We can't know if we don't study the presence of meaning when it's actually around. Okay, now in just a couple of examples of times when meaning is like gravity. One question one might ask is, well, when we're not busy searching for meaning, does that mean that it's actually there already? My students and I have found that people are very unlikely to search for meaning in positive events. If you ask people, oh, here's some events, you win a trip on spring break to Cancun or whatever, how would you experience meaning in that event? They're very unlikely to say, I struggled to make sense of it, I tried to find, an understanding. They say things like, it fits with my expectations of the world, this is how things are, right? This is the way it should be. That's how they think about positive events. In Happy Days, we did studies, have done daily diary studies, showing that the most meaningful events, the most meaningful days, we had people rate their meaning in life every day, right, for a couple weeks. The most meaningful days were not the days when you got the most work done. They weren't the days when you got your most goals, all of your goals pursued and your things that you did. They were the days when you were in a good mood. And being in a pretty good mood has a very strong effect on how meaningful a day feels. So maybe during those moments when things are going well, meaning might be present. And maybe that's one of the reasons we're not searching. But there are other things, not positive events, right, that can be sort of neutral or negative. Freud talked about the experience of the uncanny, and Wong talked about synchronicity, and both of these are about random chance events, coincidences that we just can't chalk up to chance, that feel more meaningful than random events. And we've all had that feeling that, of course, it's raining because we forgot our umbrella. Or, of course, the traffic lights are all turning red because we're running late. These little moments where something feels super meaningful in the absence of any kind of objective sense that something important has actually happened. This is, in some of my narrative research, we have done research on parents of children with Down syndrome, and we asked them to tell us to write the story of how you found out you would be parenting a child with Down syndrome. And this is a study published quite a long time ago now, but we had about 86 parents who wrote that story. And interestingly, in about 17% of those stories, the story did not begin with a blood test or a prenatal test or a few hours after the child was born, but rather with some other event that foretold the child would have Down syndrome. Some of them wrote about a dream that they had. One woman wrote about how she and her husband were at their baby shower, and they opened parenting. They were given what to expect when you're expecting, and they opened it at random, only to recoil in horror as they found that he was reading about Down syndrome. Right? So these moments. This is a quote from a woman who just had a funny feeling that her child would have Down syndrome, even though all of the prenatal tests had come back normal. And she and her sister, when she was 8 months pregnant, she and her sister took her sister's children to an amusement park. And it just happened that at the amusement park that day were all of these children with Down syndrome. And a school had been having a field trip. And her sister, who knew about her feelings, took her by the shoulders and looked in my eyes. "You know this doesn't mean anything," she said. And I looked at her and started to cry and said, "You know it does." Sometimes meaning isn't something we go out of our way to find. It finds us, and it feels inescapable. And I should say that the parents who had this kind of foreshadowing in their stories did express greater meaning in the experience of parenting a child with Down syndrome, but I'm not going to talk much about their narratives. Okay, and then how I caused an earthquake. So, get this. So, when I was an undergraduate, I took voice lessons for almost all 4 years of my college career. And why is there an assumption that everyone's going to be wearing a suit that has a pocket? Because all those people are going to be men, Laura. That is so wrong, right? Yep. Like feminists, we need to get like the law of John or whatever, what do I call it? Law of Lear for ladies or something. Anyway, this is so wrong. Okay. I studied voice and I took voice lessons, and one day, my senior year, I was at my voice lessons in this old auditorium, and I was standing up on stage, and my voice teacher was at the baby grand, running the scales, and we were trying to get me to hit this really high note that I had never hit before. And so, we were like, oh, right? When you, I try to hit these really high notes, you have to do all this stuff, prepare your instrument, and then you open your mouth as wide as you can. And the last thing you do is called open the curtain, which is that, and that's why so many, in opera, the divas look like, it's the only way to get that sound out, so I'm up there, and I made this amazing note, and I held it, and I held it, and the walls of the auditorium started to shake. And the snow on the roof started falling down. And my voice teacher, who was a very spiritual man, got on his knees and started to pray. And I stood there and thought, I will only use these powers for good. Now, you don't believe me? Check it out. From, this is it, y'all. January 31st, 1986, that's my senior year, at 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time. My voice lessons start at 11:30. Although early media speculation had the epicenter located from Columbus to southern Canada. Now, Kenya is right between that, between Columbus and southern Canada. Okay, but not really. The U.S. Geological Survey determined that the epicenter was actually east of Cleveland. It was a Richter scale 4.96 earthquake that produced very strong vibrations, noticed by numerous people. Correct. All over campus, people were causing that earthquake by plugging in a hairdryer, turning on a light switch, right? Sneezing. How awesome would that actually? Right? Now I know, right, that I did not cause the earthquake. I looked it up. There it is. It was a natural event. But I totally know I caused it. You know I did. Guilty. I caused it. So wait a minute, right? It's like knowing two things about meaning, or knowing about meaning in two different ways, right? I know I didn't cause that earthquake, but I totally know I did. And this one I know for sure. Like if I was hooked up to the polygraph, guilty. Right? I did it once I caused an earthquake. I mean, that's super awesome. Okay. It's a good feeling if you ever get a chance. Right. So, two ways of knowing about meaning. Well, we have all these dual process models that talk about how there's two ways that human beings think. Right? System one, or this intuitive or automatic system, which involves knowing without knowing why or how one knows, or asking why one knows. And that type of thinking is often shown to be facilitated by positive emotion. And system two, this newer system that we have, because we're so smart and we can think, is analytical and reflective, and it involves knowing and knowing why, and asking why. and it is generally thought to be facilitated by negative emotion. I'm going to be talking mostly about this primitive system, system 1, which is associative, just like, right, associations, and it's about automatic gut feelings and vibes that people get, and I think it might have something to do with the experience of meaning. So intuition, again, automatic, effortless, top-down, and it's described in the literature as inescapable. It's a kind of thing that's really hard to talk yourself out of. Halberstadt describes it as a collection of feeling states that ideally co-vary with the external world. Ideally, these feelings, these vibes, connect us to what's really going on in objective reality. Okay, so I'm going to suggest, I'll take a tiny little corner of meaning, and you can have all the rest. Here's the corner I call. I have dibs on this. Meaning, at least in part, is an emergent property of consciousness. An intuitive feeling state associated with the detection or abstraction of sense, pattern, regularity in the environment. At least some of it is this feeling. Like every other idea I've ever had, William James thought of this a long time ago, when he talked about in his non-sensory fringe of the stream of consciousness, William James talks about the subjective rationality of experience, or the rightness of direction of one's thoughts. This feeling, this kind of intuitive feeling that things are making sense, or not. And Bruce Mangan has referred to the feeling of right direction specifically as the feeling of meaning. To study this feeling of meaning, I'm a personality psychologist. I'm interested in individual differences in intuition. And so to start off talking about this stuff, we're going to talk a little bit about meaning in the little things, how people see meaning in life events or different stimuli. And to do that research, we've used Seymour Epstein's cognitive experiential self theory. I just wanted to show you a couple of items, how we measure this variable, which is called faith and intuition. It is essentially how much do you trust your hunches? How much do you believe in following your gut? So we measure this variable, and then we usually like to put people in a good mood, and I'll maybe explain later why that is. It doesn't matter. What time is it? It's like 4 in the morning. Okay, so happy intuitive people, when somebody who's high, who says they trust their hunches, when they're in a good mood, they're more likely to report, oh yes, I experience meaning in so many things, in a variety of different events, ambiguous quotations, Zen koans, artwork. They report more meaning in real life events, like when the University of Missouri was clobbered by Oklahoma in the Big 12 championship game. Oh yes, that's very meaningful. They also report greater belief in and meaning in videotapes of purported UFOs and ghosts. They have more trouble hitting, we asked them to throw darts at a picture of a cute baby, and they had more trouble hitting it. Now you might be like, what? It's this primitive mechanism of sympathetic magic, right? It's the same idea as a voodoo doll. That something that looks like something is that thing. And these people really had a hard time hitting. They threw some practice darts, and then we put up a picture of us to make it interesting. Let's see what happens now. We put up a picture of a cute baby. They had the most difficulty hitting the baby with the darts. Because somewhere, some babies are like, ow, ow, ow. No, that's not. And one of the reviewers of that manuscript literally said, you had people do a morally reprehensible act. And I was like, hello, could I have a system 2 reviewer, please? No babies were harmed. It's a picture. And they also ascribe more meaning to patently meaningless events like traffic lights turn red because I'm in a hurry. So people who are intuitive and in a good mood tend to show this kind of, oh, they ascribe, oh, I feel the meaning, I feel it, this is meaningful. Now you might be thinking, well, these people are goofballs, right? What are they doing? And we want to ask about the accuracy of these statements. I mean, are they actually feeling the meaning or not? Mangan said, when the feeling of rightness is present, even gibberish will feel that it makes perfect sense. And so this feeling of meaning can actually exist in the presence of complete nonsense. So what we want to know is, are these people ever right? Is it possible that they're actually right? Is there some way to check? William James said that the attempts to try to distinguish between subjective rationality and nonsense is completely impossible. Because you just can't tell. These people could say anything, right? Oh, yeah, that makes sense to me. However, social cognitive psychologists, as usual, have come up with some really cool ways to ask this question. These are semantic coherence judgment triads, and I'm going to talk about these just because later on they're going to come back in a way that is going to blow your mind. But for now, these are simply 3 words, and maybe you're familiar with the remote associates test. On that test, you get these 3 words, and you're supposed to come up with the 4th common associate. But what we do is we show people triads that have a solution or not. They're not asked to come up with a triad, with the answer. Just tell us, does it have a solution or not? And it turns out, so snow, dance, bass is a coherent triad. The answer is ball. Chocolate, fortune, smart, that's a coherent triad. The 4th common associate is cookie, right? Those are easy ones. Those last 2, triple sleep and base and complex sweet and vapor, have no solution. What we ask people to do is just read these and then as quickly as possible take a guess. Does it have a solution or not? People are surprisingly better than chance at doing this task as a rule, and they're especially good at it when they're in a good mood. So what we wanted to know is, do these intuitive people, when we put them in a good mood, are they good at this task? Okay, I will suggest that this is kind of like separating sense from nonsense. These 3 words, snow, dance, bass, it makes sense. There's sense there. It's an overlearned association, right? That's what Kahneman and Klein would describe these. These are overlearned associations. There's sense there. Or do they, and can they discriminate between sense and utter nonsense? Yeah, they can. In fact, they did better. This is not the percentage of right. If it was the percentage of hits, it would be much more dramatic. This is A prime, which is a signal detection that takes into account false alarms. Intuitive people, when they were in a good mood, actually did a very good job of separating sense from nonsense, of following their gut feelings to actual objective sense. Okay. Could some kind of processes like this have anything to do with the grand judgment of life's meaning? Yes, we measure it in a less than grand way. We ask people to rate on a scale from 1 to 7 items like this one. My personal existence is very meaningful. I would hope that all of you would understand that this is an appropriate way to measure meaning in life. Certainly for anyone who believes that meaning in life is important and adaptive, because all of the evidence that we have demonstrating that meaning in life is adaptive has come from such homely little measures. If we object to this type of measurement, if we object to asking someone, is your life meaningful or not, if we decide that that's not an appropriate strategy, then we miss out on a host of studies that demonstrate that people who give these pathetic little items high scores are better off in many, many important ways than those who give these items low scores. Scores on these pathetic little self-report measures of meaning in life are associated with better psychological health, lower suicide, less suicidal ideation even in the presence of high levels of depression, slower age-related cognitive decline, lower risk of Alzheimer's disease. What's my favorite? 2 studies now have shown that these kinds of judgments, I didn't do them, actual scientists did them, show that these are also, these judgments are related to lowered mortality risk in aging populations. So we can say, oh, that seems so lame. It isn't, okay, maybe it is, but it matters. If someone looks at these items and says, I give it a 1, they are, it relates to important things. So I have no problem with this. And in fact, people often say, well, it's a shame that the items have the word meaning in them. And I'll tell you what, I think that's the best way to go. Because we don't know what they're rating. And they don't know what they're rating, but it's something. It's meaning. It's perhaps a word for which we have no exact good definition. And maybe that's a good reason why it should stay in those questionnaires. Because it's capturing something that people don't have a really good word for. An intuitive feeling state. That's another system process. In any case, All right, so I got off my high horse. Because you're about to say, oh, well, that's because you do self-report. So in some research that we started, when I've been interested in meaning for a really long time, and I was especially interested in these narrative constructions. So we did this big, giant questionnaire study, and we measured all kinds of things, and we measured meaning in life using a bunch of self-report questionnaires. And where I was interested in meaning and happiness, and most people assume, right, that happiness is a symptom of meaning in life, or happiness is an outcome of meaning in life. But we found that these two variables were so strongly correlated, like in an adult sample, right, community sample, the correlation between positive mood, how happy you are, and your ratings of meaning in life was 0.88. That suggests that they're the same thing. And in fact, we started thinking about this, and some of my student at the time, Josh Hicks, and I said, okay, well, we got to do the study. We got to do the study. What if, for sure, I have no doubt that meaning in life causes people to feel happier, but it's a lot easier to manipulate happiness in the lab. And if you put people in a good mood, they do rate their lives as more meaningful than people in a neutral or negative mood. And we've replicated this effect now with all kinds of different mood manipulations. If you put someone in a good mood, life feels a lot more meaningful than if they're in a neutral mood. Now, I think this is important. And I want to mention this. And being in a pretty good mood will work in a pinch. So this is number 7, my magical number 7. So we measure all kinds of different things or manipulate them, right? So you think about the things that make life meaningful. Relationships. If a person has a lot of relationships, that's their line right there. They're going to say their life is meaningful. If they don't, if they're lonely or their social relationships are lacking, this is their line. If they're still in a good mood, their life is just as meaningful. If somebody has really strong religious faith, they are that top line. They're going to say their life is meaningful. If they don't have a strong religious faith, then they get to be that other line. That is to say, if they're in a good mood, this x-axis is how happy you are. Are you in a pretty good mood? When people are in a pretty good mood, life is meaningful. Life feels meaningful. When all else fails, right, when the chips are down, being in a pretty good mood can enhance the feeling that life is meaningful. Now, I want to say this relationship between positive affect and meaning in life gets stronger with age. So we've looked at samples of older adults, and it's especially in the older adults that meaning and happiness are very strongly intertwined. And I think it fits very well with many ideas about socio-emotional selectivity theory, and how people become more wise, and the really complicated problems of life become easier. It's simply the case that when we put someone in a good mood, they will report their life as more meaningful. But meaning isn't the same thing. I don't think that meaning is the same thing as pleasure, because if it were, why would we need a word for meaning? Why do we have a word for meaning? Separate from mood, separate from happiness, separate from sorrow, we have a word for something that's different from affect. And I want to talk very briefly about the role of subjective states in adaptation. This is crazy. No one should be talking about this at this hour. Like, literally, are you kidding me? What was it, 9 a.m. and we were talking about mutual orgasms, and now here we are at 10:20 talking about adaptation, subjective states. I'm sorry. It's crazy. All right. Okay, so extracting reliable association is adaptive for all creatures, right? I mean, whether they're rats or pigeons or cows or human beings, we're different because we get to feel it. We get to have awareness of those things at least some time that they're happening. And I would suggest that meaning is that subjective awareness, that subjective state. Subjective states that go on in our heads ought not to be sought for their own sake. Or if you want to explain why they're adaptive, their motivational component wouldn't seem to be the thing to look at, right? We know that human beings like to feel meaning. We have a longing for meaning, but the existence of that longing doesn't tell us why the feeling state of meaning should be adaptive. In the same way that pleasure is associated with adaptive behaviors, right? It's nature's way of getting us to do the things we should to survive. Seeking pleasure for its own sake that's not an adaptive situation. Subjective states, things that go on in the quiet of our heads, can't have an adaptive significance unless they connect us to the world in important ways, unless they provide information, right? Positive affect happens after we accomplish some important goal that's about survival. Yay, we've been rewarded. Negative affect tells us, run for it, right? There's a bear coming. Moods give us information that direct our behavior in adaptive ways. Similarly, then, might the feeling of meaning provide adaptive information? What does the feeling of meaningfulness tell us that matters in an adaptive way? And I would suggest that it provides adaptive information about the presence and reliability of signals, connections, and patterns in the environment. This is a feeling that connects us to reality in important ways that mood does not. The feeling of meaning feels good, right? When meaning is present, it can make something nasty feel good, right? I mean, like a funeral would be better, right, than just the death itself, right? When we add meaning to something, we make it feel better. But the meaning itself ought to tell us something that mood can't quite capture. And I'm going to suggest that it's this emergent feeling of meaning that tells us about the reliability of signals in the environment, in human beings, not in rats. How on earth would we study that? Okay, so my students and I, Samantha, who is here, we're interested in this. So what would happen if let's think about what we want to do here. We want to take the world and put it in the equation. We're going to expose people to sense and nonsense and see if it makes their life more meaningful. If they rate their lives more meaningful when they've been exposed to sense. We're going to induce the feeling of meaningfulness by manipulating the coherence of the stimulant that a person is going to encounter. So the first way we looked at this was with patterns. We showed participants, and these were adults who did an online study, we asked them to evaluate 16 photographs of trees. Their job was simply to say how good is the contrast in the picture and to identify what they thought was the predominant color in the picture. They saw these pictures, 16 pictures consecutively, and did each of the ratings. There were 4 pictures from each of the 4 seasons. Half the participants saw the pictures in seasonal order in 4 cycles. So they went through spring, summer, fall, winter, spring, summer, fall, winter. The other half saw the pictures in random order. And then they all rated their meaning in life. Seriously? Get ready. The blue bar is the people who saw the seasonal pattern. The pink bar is the people who saw it in the random pattern. Okay, now get this. All right, so I can be pretty happy here as a scientist. I felt at one with Isaac Newton. Because the seasonal pattern is the real one, right? I mean, that's the thing that we didn't notice. It's been around since as long as I've lived. Hopefully it sticks around a little bit longer. Okay, but we're arguing that this is a feeling that comes out of pattern. And this is obviously a familiar pattern. And I would say that if we couldn't show this in any other way, I would be happy as a clam. But we did a second study where we added a third condition, right? So we have the seasonal pattern and the random condition. And then we added a third condition where people saw the pictures organized by their seasonal content, but not in the seasons. So they might see, spring, winter, summer, fall, right? So it's not in the right order, so in a novel pattern. Okay. So we replicated the effect with the seasonal pattern. And then the question is, what about the novel pattern? Did that influence meaning in life ratings? Now I want you to remember, they were rating items like, my life is meaningful. Right? I mean, hello, you don't have to read all those self-help books. Just remind yourself, you live in a world that is characterized by pattern, by regularity, by this is the world we live in. Anyway, awesome. So then, you're interested in coherence. All right, so I talked about these overlearned associations that are those semantic coherence judgments. So what we did is we took 10 triads that all have a solution. They all make sense, okay? So we took those 10 triads and we presented them to adults, 3 words at a time, and we said, we just want you to read them. Just read the triads, these 3 words. We just want to make sure that people are able to read these words. So all they did was read the words. Half of the people saw those triads organized so that they were coherent triads. The others have read the very same words, but they weren't organized into their sensible triads. So everything was exactly the same except for the pattern. And the blue bar is the meaning and life ratings of individuals who read the coherent triads. Just read the words. Okay. I'm trying to argue that this is adaptive, that meaning in life is adaptive because the feeling of meaning is adaptive because it connects us to reality in important ways. One of the problems is that these feelings we have, these subtle gut instincts and hunches can be wrong, right? Think about other aspects of the non-sensory fringe of consciousness, such as feelings of familiarity. People are wrong, right? Oh yeah, I remember, I like that, totally, I saw that before. No, we can separate familiarity from the feeling of familiarity. So I wanted to see if we could show that meaning is tracking reality in some important ways, especially the relationship between meaning and these other aspects of the non-sensory fringe. So here's what we did. Where's my picture? Okay. Over to the right is a real constellation. It's a picture of the night sky that actually exists. That happens to be the Big Dipper. And next to it is a fake constellation we made up. We took the Big Dipper and just messed with it. Okay, we didn't, in the study I'm going to tell you about, we did not use the picture of the Big Dipper because it's really very obvious that people recognize it. What we did is we used Cassiopeia, Cepheus, and Ursa Minor and Draco. We showed people pictures of the stars. Half of the people saw those 4 or 3 constellations as they actually are, and they rated how much do you like it, the picture, and how familiar does it look to you. The other people saw fake versions of those constellations that we made by mirror imaging them and moving the stars around. So they all rated how familiar is it and how much do you like it. Okay. The blue bars are the real ones, which is interesting. If you see this, think of this. The world is a mere exposure experiment. People did not recognize the real constellations, but they liked them more. So they liked the real ones more than the fake ones, but they didn't recognize the familiarity ratings. There were no differences. Okay, so this is the, okay. So what I wanted to do was to see if these feelings of familiarity and liking had implications for their ratings of meaning in life. So after they did all this stuff, they rated how meaningful their lives were. The blue bars are the relationship, in this first slide, your left side, show you the relationship between liking and familiarity to meaning in life in the reality condition. The more the thing felt familiar and the more you liked it, the more meaningful your life was if it was real. If it was fake, that's not significant, that relationship. And then to the, on the right is actually meaning in life as a function of liking and familiarity and reality. So if you liked reality and it was familiar to you, if you were right, it contributed to your meaning in life. If you were wrong, it didn't. Maybe these little subtle feelings, we don't have to be, I feel like sometimes people are worried that my research suggests that people are out there basing their meaning in life on horrible things and they're all gonna just go, I don't know, jump off a cliff or something. No. Because it is an adaptive feeling. It's not going to be randomly just tacked on to something that doesn't matter. It's it's a way that we interact in a meaningful world. All right. So now I'm almost done. I can't believe it, I'm still awake. So maybe meaning isn't quite as hard to find as we always think about it, as we always think that it is. Maybe we think about meaning, I think, sometimes like something that occurs in the quiet of our heads, right? In this lonely state in here that we struggle and search. And I want to suggest or invite you to consider the notion that meaning might be something that connects us to the outside world. It's not just us. It's embedded in reality, and it plays an adaptive role in our lives. That it's part of an everyday existence, and we need it. We need that feeling because it has a functional role to play. I would suggest that the meaningful is happening all around us. And sometimes our job is not to struggle or search or construct, but simply to notice. We live in a world that has birth and death and youth and age and sunrises and sunsets, a world where winter is followed by spring. And life can be very difficult, and we can be confronted with the senseless, and we can be preoccupied with it. It can be really, really hard. But once in a while, we might look up and open our eyes and notice the default that's been there all along. Because I would suggest, just like Douglas said, there are signs everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. King. Good night, and we'll see you tomorrow.